All right. Can everybody see me and hear me? Hopefully. Wonderful. Anthony, if you want to go ahead and share slides, perfect. And we'll go ahead and advance to the next. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's session, Better, Smarter Agents, Reasoning with the Best Data Context, presented by Tamr and Google Agentspace. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Closed captioning is available. Simply hover over the virtual stage and click the CC button located at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to submit your questions and engage in the chat, leveraging the Q&A and chat tabs in the engagement panel on your right. And we'll do our best to answer all questions at the end of the presentation. And if we are unable to get to your question, we'll follow up with you directly afterwards. We've also added some additional resources which are available in the Docs tab, also located in the engagement panel on your right, and there you can find some additional related content. And lastly, today's webinar will be available on demand after we wrap up. It will be sent to you via email directly. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tamr's CEO, Anthony Dayton, to get us started. Anthony, over to you.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kara. I'm Anthony Dayton. I'm the CEO here at Tamr. And I have the pleasure of joining you today with our friend and partner, Jim Fairweather from Google Cloud. Jim is the head of AI go-to-market for North America at Google Cloud. And in this role, he's leading the strategy and execution for bringing Google's AI and machine learning solutions to customers all across North America. And he has a focus on helping businesses, of course, but also helping the high-tech startup community, of which Tamr is one, really take advantage of and scale the AI capabilities that Google's developed as they bring them to market. So it's a tremendous partnership. We really value the opportunity to work closely with Google Cloud on this stuff, and Jim has been a great partner in that endeavor. So welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Anthony. Glad to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about the agenda for today. We're going to start at a pretty high level, talking about what's going on in the industry around agents and agentification, as we'll talk about in a moment, and really set some context for how we think about the shifts and changes broadly in the industry. They're going to dig in some detail around Google Agentspace, the exciting new set of capabilities and product offerings that Google's announced fairly recently at Google Next, which I had the privilege and honor of being in attendance at, as was Jim, of course. Then we'll talk about about Tamr and talk about AI native MDM. And then we'll kind of put these two worlds together. We'll think about what Tamr's doing in conjunction with Agentspace. And then we'll leave you with a little bit of the art of the possible, what you should expect to see coming from a product perspective. So let's jump right into it and let's talk about AI and agents. It's always risky if you put up a slide that has a timeline that goes back to the 1970s. But I did think it was useful to put what's happening here in context of a broader set of shifts and changes in the enterprise software space. So, in the 70s going through to the 90s, we saw an enormous investment in taking manual, in often cases, paper processes and digitizing them, putting them into databases. And that built a whole series of amazing software companies, database companies, et cetera. In the 2010s, having digitized many of these processes, we saw organizations benefit from this digital data, and they could optimize those processes. They could build dashboards and analysis on top of them and really think about how to optimize the work people were doing, because now they had access to digital versions of those processes. What I think is going on for the next 20 years, next 20 or 30 years, is we're really shifting to automating a lot of this work and using agents and AI to really think about how we do work differently. How do we actually work differently in the context of these things? And in many cases, maybe having fewer people doing boring manual tasks and being able to turn those work over to agents that can work on our behalf. So with that as broader context, this new agent-centric world that's going to really be, I think, a big driver for the new interface for enterprise software in the next 20, 30 years, that introduces a whole series of new and important requirements. The biggest of which is better quality data. As we see the rise of, and as many of you on this call think about implementing AI technologies, and you think about turning those over to agents around agentification, if you are working with low quality data, you really run the risk of turning over bad data to those agents and having them make really, in a way, bad decisions with bad data. It also offers an opportunity for context. So being able to pass high quality data into these agents means that they're now operating on the best data that your organization has. And in a way, you should think about this as, what would a human being do? So if you ask the human to do something, they often will dig around inside your organization, try to pull together information, and then use it as part of the work that they're doing. And in that context is something we naturally do. As humans, we think that's an important requirement in this agentification world, which brings us to the third new requirement, which is partnership between humans and agents. That we're not imagining a world where we turn everything over to the human, but getting feedback and verification and keeping humans in the loop is a really important part of this. Let me pause, Jim. I don't want to put you on the spot, but hopefully this fits with your worldview and Google's worldview.
No, absolutely. No, it resonates really well. And I think I like what you said, and we'll get into this more about that. As we enter into this agentic era, there's going to be a new user interface. And I think every company needs to think about that, not only just for them and the products that they serve out to their own customers, but how their employees internally interact within their organization. I see this as being a competitive differentiator for hiring and kind of the war on talent that we have. But you said it, and it all comes back to the data and making sure we have context. I mean, you can see this already in prompting and different things of helping these LLMs. And then also on the partnership side, I think that will be a really interesting thing to watch at how much kind of leash we give these agents and what tasks they're doing. Because obviously with more sensitive, confidential, secure stuff, you need to have it on a pretty tight leash.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Now, the other thing you should notice from this slide is that the timeline goes out to the 2030s. Again, always a risky thing to throw on a slide. But the reason for putting 2030 there is I firmly believe we're very much in the early innings of this megatrend. And that is to say, the capabilities of large language models and other AI capabilities today are really at the beginning of their capabilities. So as and many of us have used a lot of these technologies. It's really impressive what they can do, and yet there are, in a way, it feels like the beginning of something, not even the middle, and certainly not the end. And the way to think about that, in my opinion, is that today these models are a lot like interns. And so the analogy I'm throwing out here is contrasting an intern with your best full-time employees. Your best employees, I say they have a work ethic of C, they work normal business hours, they don't work weekends, they take holidays, et cetera. Whereas an intern, they don't have a life. They're willing to come in Saturday and Sunday. They're going to come in early. They're going to stay late. They work really, really hard. And large language models and models in general work the same way, right? So they're perfectly happy to work on the weekend as well as they're willing to work during the weekend. Full-time employees, however, balance this with extraordinarily deep enrich knowledge and information about your business. They know where all the information, and they know all the people, they know how to get access to all of that context and knowledge. And they're generally very, very smart. Like, they really understand, they have the data and the knowledge, and they marry that with some rich intelligence. Interns, on the other hand, know nothing, right? They work really hard, but they just don't know anything. And they haven't had the experience that your best full-time employees have had, and that root intelligence is sort of lacking there. And the risk with these interns, of course, is that you send them off on a task, they work extraordinarily hard on the wrong thing. And again, the same problem exists with models. Now, just to add one layer of detail to this, I think it's even worse than this, because they're not just like interns, they're actually like MBA interns. And the challenge with MBAs, and I can say this as one, hopefully not insulting too many MBAs out there, is not only are these interns lacking context and knowledge, they are extraordinarily confident and eloquent, which is to say that they will say incorrect information with great confidence and sort of articulated brilliantly. And again, we've all seen models do this. And so this is, I think, the state of the art of where we are today. But again, I think we're right at the beginning of a big mega trend here. So Jim, I don't know if you want to layer any additional context on here.
No, I love how you look at this. This is something we've actually tried to help a lot of the companies with as they think about how do we even, what use cases or what problems should we put AI, or power AI onto. And I think it's, when you think about it, it's like, what if you had 1,000 interns that could work 24/7? What would you have them do? It's a great framing for like the problems that you want to solve, because a lot of this is just, part of like the low-hanging fruit with it, as we think about agents, is how do we take away kind of the joyless work that doesn't require, the human interaction or EQ that, we might need. And so I love this as a framework, and I agree.
Excellent. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk and have you share a bit about what Google's doing with Agentspace. Yeah,
sure. Let me pull up my screen here. Yeah, thanks, Anthony. This is, look, we're in a really fun time in technology, and I think we're all living through it. And it's one of these times where everything is new, and at the same time, everything's the same, and we're just working all through it together. And so I think as we talk about Agentspace here today, what I'm going to show you is kind of the early stages of where we are. This product is not even fully generally available yet. And what I'd like to say first too is thank you to Anthony and the Tamr team for working with us on this, because Tamr, something I've always admired about Tamr is just that they're early. And I think fortune favors the bold, and that's been true for Tamr in a lot of different respects. But they've come on board with us early, not only to be a client, but to be a development partner as we look at building connectors and agents. And I think, we're only just getting started with this ecosystem, and it's really exciting to see what's coming. But if you think about the problem we've kind of always had for decades, is that we've had a lot of technology that has worked together. We've had a lot of technology and across the years, and some of it's been good and bad. The position we find ourselves in now is that we have awesome technology. It just doesn't all work together very well. And so when you think about, getting all this technology and how do we make it work together, there's a lot of ways that you can do that wrong. So the execution is really, really important, because we need to make sure we're not entering a new fragmented environment as we enter in all these agents, as we enter in using different hyperscalers, as we enter in using different applications. And so that's one of the things we're trying to really solve for and work with is, a provider that can drive that kind of end-to-end integration across all of your enterprise systems. And so as you think about that in the different use cases, it's like, what if we could have all our enterprise systems talk together? And, I think about for the audience on this call is, just take like the marketing and sales, for instance. What if we were able to go back and look at the best campaigns from last year across our CRM and all our different, content generation platforms, and understand and summarize, get the insights from last year, and then be able to create with multimodal approach, new video, new audio, new pictures and print. What if in sales, we were able to get our customers' latest earnings reports, summarize those, provide insights, and generate a podcast about it? That's stuff that's available today. We can do that now. Whereas, before, this would take, I know something we do every year is we're constantly changing and reorging. As I look at North America and what we did this year with reorging, how we position and, handle our clients, there's always this knowledge exchange that goes on about, different clients, especially I'm sure all of you have large clients who you work with. There's always a trade of information, sometimes be, hour, 2-hour phone calls about just sharing knowledge information. Now you can take all the documents, all the meetings, all the notes, all the prep, along with external sources, and create a 15-minute podcast that can get people up to speed and make yourself a lot more efficient as you head into that initial call and ask, better questions with better insights. So there's a lot of different use cases here that we can go into, but those are a few that I think are just, again, low-hanging fruit on some joyless work that can be solved for immediately. And so this is kind of the interface, and it's funny, we've been using this internally ourselves and, working out some of the kinks. This user interface has changed about 3 times over the last 3 weeks. And Anthony, you've probably seen it change even since Next. So it's been fun. It's something we're iterating on really, really quickly, but this is what it looks like. And so we focus on these 3 different areas, which is finding, which is kind of, the ability to use AI to search across text and image and videos to get those deeper insights, not just put the information up, but to gather insights from it. And then we use the AI to reason and make sense of that complex information. And so that was kind of the podcast example with Notebook LM, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But okay, fine, if I have all this information, you think about like a company like Tamr is able to provide you all that current context information at your fingertips. Okay, then how do I think through it? Now that I have it, what insights can I take out of this that I wouldn't have been able to see otherwise? And then that gets us to our last point, which is act. And this is where we have the agents with human in the loop be able to take action on our behalf with some of those, joyless tasks. Think about things as simple as and scheduling and sending email follow-ups, or working on Jira tickets and things like that. And so we have a bunch of different connectors, over 100 connectors for different enterprise applications. It's all going to be underpinned by our security and compliance controls. And so these are coming on more and more every single day. And this is where the ecosystem will really look to get built up. But the thing we're trying to do is provide a trusted and secure framework to make all of this happen and really unleash the information and the data across your enterprise. And so taking a level deeper, looking at this kind of multimodal approach, I think a lot of times we think about text as the only way to get information, or charts, or sheets or slides. You're now able to upload audio. You're now able to upload videos, pictures, and you can all use that as insights to get out and find whatever you need for your enterprise and for whatever task you're trying to accomplish. The next is this understanding piece, which is again underpinned by Notebook LM. If you haven't played with this already, I would highly recommend you do. You can upload up to 300 sources. If you want it for yourself and you need a pump up, put in your LinkedIn address or your resume, and it'll make a whole podcast about you. And really, this is now available in 50 different languages. So if you're a global company and need to make sure that everybody in your organization can use it, they can. But it's grounded in the information you give it. And I think that's really the important part. It cuts down on hallucinations incredibly well, because it's only acting on the information you give it. But you think about things like FAQ documents, and you have an event coming up, it can create all of that for you right away with a click. Again, this is what we were talking about on acting is, deploying and accessing agents to complete these tasks effortlessly. You'll see some things here, which are like emails. Google's going to provide out of the box some pre-made agents that will like deep research and this idea generator that we'll talk about. But also, this is where I think it's an incredible opportunity for ISVs, software companies like Tamr, to come and show up on a new surface for your customers and provide something that they've never seen before. And I think that's where you can really increase the moat and competitive advantage you have by building an agent that can really blow people away with what it can do. It's taking your software to that next level to be able to serve your customers in a way they never thought possible. And that's what we're really excited about, seeing this ecosystem kind of take advantage of. Agent Gallery, this is going to be a place where as different agents come in, you will have, as an administrator, kind of access to show or allow what agents people can take advantage of. We're going to have this ability for you to build your own agents. So for folks that don't need, a programming background or a design background, business users can create their own agents and publish them to the enterprise if they'd like. So for those specific tasks that are being repeated and done over and over, that might be specific to your job or your unit, your division, you can, again, create and automate those joyless tasks and really increase the efficiency. Deep research is one we've come out with. If you've played with Gemini, you've had access to this, but can work through a lot of different thinking and reasoning processes. And again, being able to use your data to think deeply and give you as you dissect kind of the complex data questions we have. And then this idea generation one is interesting. I think folks for a while have thought about how to use LLMs and AI as a thought partner. This kind of puts that on steroids. And what this does is almost like a March Madness or playoff setup of ideas. And so it will actually put ideas against each other and eliminate down to the one that you want to go with next. So really excited about this. This will be rolling out shortly, something we announced recently at Next. But as you think about it, what we want Agentspace to be, there's no doubt that agents are here and now. And so what we want Agentspace to be is this place where you can have expert built Google agents that will provide you from first party. You can have your high code agents, which is something that a Tamr would build, or you can build internally for your own specific agents for internal folks. And then we have our no code agents, which is something I could build for my team or other divisions. And then we're going to have our partner agents, which will be available in the Google Cloud Marketplace in a really secure environment for folks. Tamr can upload theirs and you can get it right from Google Marketplace. And again, that would be part of commitment contracts and things like that. So this is a view of where that would be. And we have, great partners like Accenture, Deloitte, Tamr's here. And this is going to be a place where, people can get them. So it's not going to be rogue. We want to provide controls and, administrative support on how these things get downloaded and used. But we're building out an entire marketplace for it. I mean, we think about this as kind of being the next wave of, if you think about an app, there will essentially be an agent store now. And so I think for you, as folks think about this for internally, but also for how you show up to your end customers, this is a place you don't want to be left out of. And so we're really excited to work with a bunch of companies on this, and Tamr being one of our earliest. So that's most of it from me, Anthony. And again, I think the underpinning on this, and the thing that everybody has to keep in the forefront of their mind, is security. And I think that's one of the reasons we launched this agent-to-agent protocol, to kind of like support the MCP revolution that's going on, is we want to make sure everybody's secure. And as we use our knowledge graph for search, there's a personification that goes by that. And so we want to make sure people are accessing the right information that they can. And that's why we want to provide this platform for everybody to make sure that they can get the best information for them specifically in the right context. So that's it from me, Anthony, but I'll pass back to you.
Cool. That's great. So let's jump back into the slides. And let's shift gears and talk a little bit about Tamr sort of generally, and then we'll dig into what we're doing together around Agentspace. So Tamr, if I sort of step back, came out of academic research at MIT around, in a way, a simple problem but hard to do, which is, imagine I had data across hundreds or thousands of tables, millions or even billions of records of data, and it was all about the same thing. It was all about my customers or my suppliers, whether those customers are people or companies. And what I really wanted to do was unify that data, bring it together. That is a thankless and difficult task, and I actually love that way of thinking about it, Jen, like what's thankless and difficult work. That's difficult and thankless work. And the academic research that Mike Stonebreaker and Andy Palmer were focused on was like, can we train a machine to do that? Is that a possibility? And it turns out, after a bunch of academic research and 18 patents, yeah, you can actually train a machine to do that work. And that became the core central foundation of Tamr's AI native master data management solution. So, and we believe this to be true, that at the core of every MDM problem is unifying that data, bringing it together, doing that at scale, and then putting on top of that a whole set of APIs and user interface, which makes it easy for people to consume the data, but also prevents data from being entered incorrectly and allowing people to surface the right data at the point of decision. And that becomes this AI native MDM system. And we'll come to this in a few slides, but at its core, really what the conversation here around Agentspace is about: how do I make that AI native system available in a really simple way into amazing new platforms like Agentspace from Google? And what would that mean, and what would that allow? But master data management is a tough space, quite honestly, because historically it's been really difficult for for our customers, to be able to solve this problem. Typically, what we see customers doing is one of two things: either throwing people at the problem. So they will literally take teams of people, often in a low-cost area, and they will go record by record and try to resolve data and fix it up, to curate it, et cetera. That is really not scalable. It's typically quite expensive and difficult. The other thing we see customers doing is, I always call this smothering it in process, which is to say, lock the data down and make sure nobody changes anything, because any change to the data then kicks off this expensive process of trying to fix it and resolve it. And so you set up these very complicated rules-based systems, which are themselves difficult to maintain and keep up to date. But really, fundamentally, what you're doing is preventing people from modifying or using, frankly, even the data. And as you would imagine, when you put up a system like this, people go around the system. They're like, great, if the master data is too difficult and complicated to use, I'll just go outside the system. Our view is, with an AI native approach, we can break this logjam, and we can actually get to this high quality data organized by entity inside the enterprise and power an MDM system using this approach. That AI is the great unlock in the MDM space. And what that looks like is a set of golden records around the key entities that matter to you as a business: your customers, your suppliers, people, companies. And there's a set of tasks that we ask the AI to do, from mapping to a conformed schema about that entity, cleaning and validating the data, verifying that the data is real in the world, so what we call a verified match. Then the obvious, which is clustering the records together around the same entity, enriching it with third-party data, and ultimately, and frankly most valuably, publishing that as a golden record, the best value, the best record associated with this entity available across a number of different endpoints. And so what that looks like in reality, or in practically, is major use cases. One, analytics. So we allow those golden records to show up in the analytic tool of your choice, powering dashboards and analysis, helping you make better decisions. Directly through consumption interfaces. So literally, I can go look at a 360 page about that entity, and then through APIs into these operational systems, so that in real time, you can power your operational processes and actually do those processes more efficiently and save money. So sort of thinking left to right, many hundreds of source systems through Tamr running on and with Google Cloud out to these three important consumption-based experiences. What we're talking about here in the context of the relationship with Google around Agentspace is one really important, I would argue, maybe the dominant consumption pattern that we are seeing and we will see in the future, which is through these agent-like experiences. So leveraging standards like MCP, Jim mentioned, and also agent-to-agent to provide the important security wrappers around MCP, we can take the data from Tamr, all of your mastered entity data organized across the key entities that matter to you as a business, and have that available into Agentspace. And this directly provides the capabilities we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, things like quality, context, and human-to-human or human-to-agent partnership that makes that data really, really useful. Now, I think this is maybe helpful to understand, what is Tamr and how does it work with Agentspace, but it's probably even better if we show it as a real thing. So I'm going to walk you through a kind of click demo of what it looks like to use Tamr MDM data in the context of Agentspace. So we'll start the demo in a way without Tamr. So if you come into Agentspace and you ask Agentspace a really simple question, and Jim, I hope you don't mind, I'm kind of picking on you for the demo, but I asked the system, what do you know about Jim Fairweather? And one thing we know about large language models is, since they've been trained generally on a lot of internet data, is they don't know a lot about a specific, in this example, person named Jim Fairweather. And the model does kind of what you would expect, which is like, well, Jim Fairweather is a common name. There's probably a bunch of Jim Fairweathers. I'm not quite sure who or what you're talking about when you do that. And maybe this is where the conversation might have ended before Google made Agentspace with the rich agent and connector framework available to us. Because now what we can do is we can go ahead and click on Tamr's MDM, where we've organized a bunch of data around customers, and now we can ask the question again, search for Jim Fairweather, and we call out to Tamr's MDM system and ask Tamr, what do we know about Jim Fairweather? It turns out we know a lot about Jim. So, here we've pulled together a bunch of information about, Jim, and that is now added as context into the conversation we're having around with this agent. And now we can kind of do something sort of exciting. So imagine I want to go and meet Jim, and we're going to go meet in San Francisco, and I would like to meet him, but I want to meet him at a coffee shop. And so here, I'm going to ask the agent, hey, I'm excited to meet Jim in San Francisco. Could you find me a high-quality coffee shop near his office? And here, the Agentspace is smart enough to know that Tamr's MDM doesn't know anything about coffee stores, but Google Maps does. And so it can go out and ask Google Maps with the context of Jim's location in San Francisco for what are the coffee stores that would be near the offices, Google's offices in San Francisco. And it's given me a list. I picked the first one. St. Frank Coffee seems like a good place. And now we can kind of have the moment of truth where you can bring together the language capabilities of Google's amazing models with the context and information from, in this case, Tamr's MDM data organized around customers and this Google Maps information. And I'm going to ask the system to write me an email from me with context about who I am, what Tamr does, to go meet with, in this case, Jim, but at this coffee store. And what you see when you get back this email, and you can read it at your leisure, but if you look into the details of this email, it's extraordinarily well thought through. It knows me, it knows who Tamr is and what we do, it knows Google and what Google does, and it knows this particular coffee store, and it's bringing all of that context and information together and writing a really high quality introductory email for me to send to Jim with a specific location and explaining why Jim at Google ought to be interested in meeting with me from Tamr. And so again, I hope what you see in this quick little click through is why it's so valuable to bring data in contextual information is agentic experiences so that we can create outcomes just like this. So with that, we're going to open it up to Q&A, and yeah, let's jump into that. And Kara, I think you were going to help us mediate the Q&A.
So many buttons to press. I think I'm off mute, and hopefully you can hear me. Thank you both, Anthony and Jim. So yes, we'll shift into a live Q&A. So if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat in the panel to your right. But we'll jump in. So I guess first question for you, Jim. Can you please elaborate a bit on Google's broader strategy and long-term vision for Agentspace?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we believe this is the future of knowledge work. And so I think what we've tried to do is provide a platform that's really secure, that is open to doing a lot of things. And I think if I were to say I know where this is going, I'd be lying. I mean, it's moving so fast, and I think what we need to just do is be open and available. I think that's why I get excited about working with clients like Tamr and what they're going to do with it, because I think I've presented this to a number of CEOs at different ISV and tech companies, and it's kind of like everybody, once they get it, they start to have a new idea of how they can engage. I think the interesting piece will be how these agents start to talk to each other. And I think that's going to be kind of the future of where this goes, is that, I think we'll see everybody building agents this year. I think by the end of the year, we'll see people using agents in a regular way. And I think at the beginning of 2026, we'll start to see a separation of whose agent's good and isn't. And it's going to be hard to catch up. So I think everybody needs to be investing in this now and, showing up in that way. But I think the folks that are on the bleeding edge of this, Tamr being one, is already thinking about how does my agent talk to another agent to provide more value to my end customer.
Great, thank you, Jim.
I would just add that I think this is very similar to, and hopefully that first slide setting up the big trends here, this is very similar to, being at the very beginning of the early digital transformation initiatives where people were moving business processes into digital, or even early analytic journeys where people were moving and creating more analysis to help optimize process. It's very early days, and we probably don't know half of what we don't know. Very much to your point, Jim.
All right, last question over to you, Anthony. That was a cool example for finding out about a person. What are some other ways you envision Tamr customers using your agents?
Yeah, so imagine you're in charge of supply chain for your business, and there's a news event which you worried would be would sort of impact your supply chain. Supply chain data is probably being held in some of your ERP systems in terms of what are open orders. You might have supply chain, you may have some document data stored in Google Drive about contracts you've signed with those suppliers. And of course, you need to have a 360 view of that supplier relationship. So being able to link all of those suppliers together, really understand who is the supplier that may be disrupted. Being able to pull all of that together in context of a language model might allow you to, for example, give yourself a dossier, a sort of a summary of what this potential supply chain disruption would do to your known and existing suppliers. And then just to make the example a little more fun, imagine if you're driving to work and you want that read to you or given to you as an audio that you could listen to as you drive into work, where it would sort of summarize that information and give you the context, knowledge, and information you need so that when you walk into your office and you need to make some phone calls about how to move, bring on board or bring online some new suppliers, that you could do that. Another example you might think about is imagine sending to every one of your most valuable customers a personalized video which articulates the products they bought from you and what their next most obvious purchase experience from you might be. That would require context and knowledge about products, but also your customers, and also potentially image data about what products you're offering and things like that, and then make it into a fun, God forbid, TikTok style like video that you could send off to the customer. So those are just some off the cuff ideas that might be interesting. I don't know, Jim, if you had, I won't put you on the spot, but ideas.
No, I want to see your TikToks. No, I think you're right. I think there's this like hyper personalization that can be created, and I think that's too. When you have these like agents that you could build just for you, I think we're going to have some of that, and so it's. But the data is so important. It has to be in the right context, and I think that's the really interesting piece about leveraging without context. It's just not going to work as well. But when you give it the right context, these things are so powerful now that you're going to get the right answers. And it's, again, hyper personalized.
All right. Awesome. We have a couple more questions that just came through, and we do have a few minutes. So next one is to you, Anthony. Exciting stuff was the opening. Curious, in that example of the coffee shop recommendation, do similar authority, relevance, etc. metrics inform how these recommendations appear?
Sure. In the example that I provided, in a way, what we were doing was linking together two MCP services, one from Tamr to give context about the person, in that case, Jim, very of the moment example. And then the second was Google Maps, which is obviously a very rich source of location information, and in particular, very good about things like stores. And you could have also asked it questions like, is the coffee shop open during the time that I want to meet, things like that. And so my expectation is that we're going to see a lot of additional services being built and launched that offer an array of different capabilities. And really what the agent-to-agent protocol from Google provides as extending what's available from MCP is a way of explaining to the language model what are the features and capabilities of the underlying service. And so I think this also produces some opportunities from Tamr's perspective in MDM. So for example, in the example I provided, it was really about giving, in the example, context about the person. But imagine that when I brought up Jim, I have a new address for Jim, and his address is incorrect. Actually, as it turns out, in the example, his address is incorrect, but leaving that minor point aside, I might be able to say back to the system, hey, that address for Jim is wrong. The correct address is, 123 Main Street, et cetera, whatever the right address is. And that feedback would go into another MCP service from Tamr, which would accept an update to a golden record. And typically in Tamr's case, because it's an update to master data, and it's coming from a user such as myself, it would be put into a queue for a human to review before being written to the golden record. Again, you might have some logic around that, like if you're a data curator or you own that entity, maybe your rights are you can just go ahead and update the entity so the model could accept that feedback and then write it directly into the master data system. Or maybe in my case, I don't have that right, and it goes into a queue, and the curator approves that change when they see it come into their queue. You could imagine updates like that. You could also imagine thinking about history. So, Jim currently works for Google, but presumably he's had a long and illustrious career before that and worked at other places, lesser places, of course. But it might be interesting to say, what's Jim done over time, and or think about it from a B2B customer perspective. Has there been a merger or acquisition for a customer, and being able to keep that contextual history that we maintain in the MDM system to understand how the data shifted and changed over time. And that's also the last thing I'll say here, opportunity in the context of agents, because you could imagine an agent working on behalf behind the scenes, watching the data change in your MDM system, and then alerting you when data shifts or changes, that there's a divestiture or a merger between two of your customers, et cetera. So hopefully those are a bunch of examples that address the question.
Anthony, I think that's going to be a really important piece as this works forward, and that's one of the things we incorporate in Agentspace too, is being able to leverage real-time web information versus just whatever your data sources say, and that's just a new way to keep everything fresh and accurate. So I think that's going to be a huge piece for a lot of folks.
Great. All right, we have time for about 2 more questions. So Jim, next one is for you. Could you show us more about how permissions work? For example, can we have different agents assigned to different teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So permissions would work kind of in the same way they're set up today. So we kind of adopt whatever permission framework that you're using today. And so theoretically, when folks would sign in, their same permissions would be available. So.
Great, thank you. And final question over to you, Anthony. Is Tamr an AI-driven data pipeline automation platform?
Yeah, so yes and no, which in fairness is a bit of a wishy-washy answer. So the question presupposes that, or imagines a generally horizontal data platforming pipeline environment. And no, Tamr is not a sort of general purpose data pipelining system. Having said that, many data pipelines are used, or the purpose of many data pipelines, or some data pipelines, is to bring data together from a number of different systems and build a unified view of, for example, your customer. That's a very common requirement. In that case, the answer is yes, meaning what Tamr provides is that outcome, which is a 360 view of the customer, a 360 view of the supplier, whether it's people or companies. And behind the scenes, of course, we use data pipelining technology. There's a lot of technology we're using behind the scenes to achieve that outcome, but it's not a general purpose, generic data pipelining capability. It's built for a specific purpose, and that specific purpose is AI native MDM. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Anthony. All right, well, that concludes our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we really hope you found the session valuable. Just a quick reminder, as we saw this in the Q&A, today's webinar was recorded, and we will share it with you on demand shortly. We'll send out a link so you can rewatch it or share with your colleagues. And before you go, we'd love your feedback. So you'll see a survey launch just shortly. If you can take a minute or 2 to fill it out, this will really help us continue to improve and bring you the content you want to see. And thank you again so much for spending your day with us. We hope to see you at a future event soon.